You're listening to the In Context War Report, produced by MDR Productions, Inc. The In Context War Report is broadcast on the fourth Monday of the month on WPKN 89.5 FM in Bridgeport, Connecticut, streaming at WPKN.org. You can also watch this show at youtube.com/InContextReport. This program will be archived at WPKN.org, on our show's website, InContextReport.com, and on our YouTube channel. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and write to us at ken@mdrtalk.org. Marchand, let's talk about Vladimir Putin now, the man who's led Russia for the last 14 years. Let me ask you a general question. How would you rate Vladimir Putin's effectiveness as a national leader?
Well, I would definitely put him up there with the likes of Russian leaders such as Peter the Great. I mean, he has taken Russia from the Dark Ages and brought it into the 21st century. If you go to any major Russian news station, radio station, they're all broadcasting online. There are apps, and I have one on my phone so I can practice learning Russian. I have an app on my phone that allows me to play 50 different Russian radio stations. Now, you compare this with the state Russia was in even in 2000. It was a third world country, and now he's pulled it kicking and screaming, just as Peter the Great did, into the 20th century. This doesn't mean Russia's a wonderful place everybody would want to live in. And mind you, it still is an authoritarian regime, just as it was under the czars. But authoritarian state though it may be, he's done what very few Russian leaders have been able to do before him. He's also brought Russia militarily to the point where it can go toe-to-toe with the West. I mean, Russia was behind defeating the United States' efforts in Syria and defeating the United States' efforts against Iran. So Putin has built Russia from a third world country that it was in 1991 to a modern superpower that can not only defy the West, but directly challenge it.
Tell us about Vladimir Putin's background, especially his experience with the KGB and his rise to power.
Putin was somebody who always had a single-minded sense of purpose. There's a great documentary, if our viewers and listeners ever get the chance to see it, called The Putin System. It was made by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And it's about the life of Vladimir Putin. One of the things they talk about from interviews with people who've known him is from the time he was a child, he was always fascinated with the Russian secret service, the spy agencies and whatnot. He always used to watch the Stalinist classics, the great World War II movies of the Stalinist era. But this says a lot about the man himself. He was somebody who was very single-minded. He had a focus. And when he was a teenager, he entered the office of the KGB in Leningrad, where he was born, and asked to join. You don't have many teenagers in most parts of the world. You don't have very many teenagers lining up to ask the CIA if they can join. But this kid, as a teenager, was asking to join the KGB, and they said, no. You don't ask to join, we ask you to join. But go to school, go to St. Petersburg University, which is a KGB school, mind you, and study law and languages. So he went, when he was in law school, he was approached by the KGB. And in 1975, became an agent working in East Germany, a very successful agent, mind you, working with the German Stasi. And he rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel in 1991 when the Soviet Union fell.
Putin is a very interesting character. You mentioned all of the progress that they've made there, and he is. I wouldn't classify him as a good guy. Certainly not for individual liberties and equality. Let's just make that clear, right?
He's good at what he does.
But he's really good at what he does. And one thing I just want to say, you mentioned he walked into the Secret Service office, and then you mentioned the CIA. The CIA advertises now on Spotify. I'm listening to my music while I work, and then I hear these ads come on. They're like, "Come work for the CIA and work in undercover operations or something," whatever they call it. And not many people show up to the Secret Service office and ask for a job. Putin is kind of like the guy who watches Jaws and roots for the shark. He gets stuff done, but he's just an awful guy.
Well, what was his in '91? There's the coup. The Soviet Union collapses. Gorbachev's efforts for a new, more democratic, volunteer Soviet Union fails, I think partly because of American interference. And Yeltsin, who seems to be backed by the United States, takes power. The Soviet Union is is quickly dismantled. What is Putin's role in the Yeltsin administration, and how does he move into a position of power?
Well, Putin was very clever. He was, let's not make any mistake about it, he was a diehard Soviet. I mean, his mentor was Yuri Andropov, who was the head of the KGB and eventually premier of the Soviet Union. Now, he was Putin's mentor. So Putin never lost focus of that, but he also knew what he had to do to get into power, because he felt that Boris Yeltsin and his crowd betrayed Russia, but in the same vein, he knew he couldn't stand up to him. So he allied himself with his former law professor, Anatoly Sobchak, and actually helped elect Sobchak to the position of mayor of St. Petersburg. And so through this, he worked his way, because Sobchak was very closely connected to Yeltsin. And when Yeltsin came to Sobchak and said, listen, I need a man from KGB who can do the dirty work for me, in essence, do you know anyone? Sobchak said, oh yeah, I know this guy, Vladimir Putin, he'll be your man. And that's how Putin sort of wormed his way into the Yeltsin family, which was actually called the family, believe it or not. That was the nickname they gave themselves,
So this doesn't sound like a program that Putin, knowing as we do, that he would have supported, but he endured this Yeltsin administration and survived it.
He did, because he knew he had to. Again, Putin's very much a man with a single-minded focus. He knows what he has to do. He knows what his goal is. His goal is the restoration of the Soviet Union, but more than that, the restoration of Russian glory. It's the restoration of Russia as an empire, which is also why he's an authoritarian. He squashes unrest, but that was also how he dealt with the oligarchs. In 1998, he became head of the FSB. Now, they were the successors to the KGB. You have the KGB, after the Soviet Union was dissolved, it became the FSB.
They went through a rebrand.
Exactly. During their ceremonies, they still kiss the flag that has the hammer and sickle on it. I mean, nothing's changed. And when he came in, it was rare, because the FSB, unlike our CIA, is an army. It's a virtual army. And so when he became head of FSB, it would be like taking a lieutenant colonel from our active duty army and putting him in charge of the entire armed forces. But because he was old KGB, the FSB men trusted him. And there's actually a famous video of Putin after he became president, when he's speaking at the Dzerzhinsky Club. Dzerzhinsky was the first head of the Cheka, which became the KGB. And during the speech, he said, I promised that the KGB would come back to power. Today, I have fulfilled that promise. And so he always had a very single-minded focus.
I'm thinking in my mind as you're explaining this, man, how underhanded and crooked and slimy the country would elect the former head of the Secret Service. And then I'm thinking, wait, we elected George H.W. Bush.
That's right.
The head of the CIA.
And at least with we have a very sort of love-hate relationship with the CIA in terms of, a lot of like, do this, Iran Contra. But for the Russians, their relationship with the KGB and later on with the FSB was these were the people who were still loyal to the Russia that they knew, whereas everybody else had betrayed it. And one thing that Putin did when he was head of the FSB is he gathered information on all of these oligarchs, so that in 1999, when he became prime minister by Boris Yeltsin, he was named prime minister, and then because of Yeltsin's failing health, in December of 1999, December 31st, he was made president by interim. And as soon as becoming president, he then won the election in 2000, in May of 2000. He had gathered all of the oligarchs together in a room, and he said, it's business as usual, but stay out of politics. And the message was very clear. You guys, you can keep doing business, but you're done. You're not in politics anymore. And he knew they'd stand up to him. But the moment they did, he crushed them.
What was the condition of the economy and particularly of the military when Putin took over from Yeltsin?
It was in tatters. I mean, the Russian military, and you can see from their performance in the first Chechen war in the mid-90s, the Russian military performed appallingly badly. They lost. They lost a war to a band of poorly armed Chechen rebels. Second Chechen war, they did a little better, but that's because Putin's personality. Again, when he was made president by interim, typically the president-elect would go to the Bolshoi Theater to watch, an opera, and everybody would see. But the presidential box was empty because the moment Putin was put in charge of the country, he went right to the Chechen front and handed out personally engraved daggers to the soldiers fighting on the front. So I think it was his personality that actually won the Second Chechen War. It was him. He was the first Russian leader to actually, again, that Peter the Great mentality, I'm going to be on the front lines. I'm leading from the front. I mean, can you imagine today an American president going to a war zone with the bullets whizzing overhead? So that won him a tremendous amount of affection, but that also won him the loyalty of the military. So he took this disheveled military, but the first thing he did was he stood up to the oligarchs. He then arrested them individually for tax evasion and all sorts of other things, and then appropriated all of their wealth because the Russian government had loaned all this money out to the oligarchs. Now he called them on their debt, which they obviously couldn't pay back. So he appropriated them, and everything that was owned by them, like one of the major TV stations, NTV, that was owned by Boris Berezovsky, was taken over by Gazprom, which is a state-owned natural gas company. But that company now owns everything in Russia because everything was appropriated into that one entity, which now meant he took back everything that had been stolen and brought it back to the coffers of the Russian government. And now that allowed him to start reforming the military, rebuilding the infrastructure and the economy. He kicked out all of the foreigners that were hired by these oligarchs and employed Russians instead, which also helped revitalize the Russian economy.
That's always a popular move. I mean, especially in a country that has a strong nationalistic pride. Whenever a strong leader, a real Russian, is going to pull resources back to strengthen the country, that can't help but bolster your popularity. I mean, how could that ever go the other way?
And people, of course, would take pride in the restoration of the military's strength. And you've spoken before about the role of the Cossacks. Could you talk about them?
Absolutely. In November of 2012, Vladimir Putin restored the Cossacks as a police force. Now, this is something that hadn't been done since the time of the Tsars. The Tsars always used the Cossacks not just as army units, but as police forces because they were militantly loyal to the Tsar. Now, when the Bolsheviks took power, they disbanded all the Cossack police units. In 2012, Putin brought back the Cossack police officers, which is why there are, if you look at not only in the Crimea, but in other places all over Russia, in Moscow, St. Petersburg, there are police officers that wear the high boots and the fur hats of the Cossacks because they're Cossack policemen, militantly loyal to the government, and they're people who do not, I mean, I wouldn't want to be on the wrong side of one of them in a dark alley. They are the government's shock troops. Now, regular Russians accept this because while personal freedom means a lot to us as Americans, to the Russians, security means more than anything. And so while these are very heavy-handed authoritarian systems, Russia's a safer country than it was during the time of the fall of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union fell, mobsters ruled the streets. Now the Cossacks rule the streets. Granted, you can't go out and protest, but now you don't have to worry about getting mugged or having somebody, take your store for extortion. And so to the Russians, that plus the restoration of their national pride is why he's so popular. To them, driving a BMW is not as important as having that national pride. He also restored the hymn of the Soviet Union, different lyrics, but written by the same author as the Russian national anthem. And he restored the hammer and sickle as the emblems used during all of the May Day celebrations. So again, this is something that to the Russians increases his stature and his popularity and that sense of, as you mentioned, nationalism.
So really, one of the major objectives of his administration is to be the restoration of the Russian military as a means of thwarting the encirclement of Russia by NATO. How would you assess his strategy at this point?
I think it's very successful. I mean, at this stage, Europe really is not in a position to get directly involved, in the sense that Putin realized when he wrote Russia in the New Millennium, which was really his manifesto, he wrote that the control of natural resources would allow you to basically control the world. And because he controls all the oil and natural gas going into Europe, Europe's not in a position really to oppose him, effectively that is. And the United States is far too weak. And he saw that by testing us in Syria, by the fact that we bungled so badly in Syria, the fact that you were able to have a pro-Russian coup in Syria, not in Syria, a pro-Russian coup in Egypt, which brought to power General el-Sisi, demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt that the United States was largely an ineffective opponent, and therefore Russia could really flex its military muscle and its national muscle. So I think what the Russians are doing, it's very well thought out. It's very methodical. Again, it's like when he took on the oligarchs. He didn't just decide overnight, I'm going to take them on. He built up all of the files, all of the networks, and then he took them down in, a one fell swoop, as they say. So I think you see the same exact thing that's going on now.
Not to mention that Europe is economically not in a position to oppose anything. I mean, they have no money to pay for their own public sector obligations in many of the countries. Their public debt is just so overwhelming that there's just no way that they're going to be able to, put an opposition together to force Russia to do anything, hand back Crimea or anything like that.
And that's one of the things that's also the United States is very afraid of. And one of the things that NATO, I think, is very afraid of is the fact that on the one hand, you have this Russian expansion in the East, but because of the incredible economic hardships in Western Europe, especially in places like Italy and Greece and Spain and even Ireland, what you can see eventually is the Russians trying to topple governments, and they're putting pro-Russian left-wing governments, which wouldn't be beyond the realm of possibility. So the Europeans are very frightened on many levels.
But certainly Vladimir Putin, 14 years as a leader of Russia, is going to continue to play a significant role in this East-West confrontation. That's it for this show. On behalf of In Context Military Affairs commentator Marchand MacDermotRoe, producer Gus Cantavero, this is your host Ken MacDermotRoe. Thanks for listening. See you next time.